From the School of Life Foundation, this is another episode of What You Given, a broadcast based on the invitation, find what brings you joy and match it to the needs of the world. This becomes your gift. Everyone has something inside of themselves to give, and I want to know, what are you giving? In my interviews, we meet people from all walks of life. I am Jack Rolfe, and on the show today, I have Morgan Pearson. Morgan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. And I'm just going to jump right off the bat here, Morgan, and say most people would recognize you by the name of Morgan Jones.
That's right. That's right. I'm actually really impressed that you were so on top of things. Well done.
Well, good. Yeah, we've got to do our homework so we know who we're talking with. And, I would love to hear a little bit about this wonderful event you had recently in your life.
Yes. So just over a month ago, I got married, and it was really exciting. I'm a little bit older. I'll be 33 in June. And so I think at some point you kind of wonder, is that going to happen for you? And really feel blessed to have found somebody that I feel like is 100% worth the wait, and has just been a real blessing in my life. So we got married. We've been married for almost 6 weeks now. And we're doing great. We are enjoying married life, which I'm realizing is, I feel like, better than people advertise it as.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, it is wonderful. Very, very wonderful. This year will mark 44 years for my wife and myself being married, and every year just gets better and better.
Well, congratulations. That's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I hope I am still around when you hit your 44th. And
I hope so too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I just wanted to throw something out here too. You are usually on the other end of interviews. You're the one doing the interviews. With your podcast, All In, you've done close to 200 episodes. Before that, you wrote, was it almost 500 stories, right? With Deseret News.
Yes, sir.
With faith feature stories. So you were interviewing a lot of people with that. And but I do know that you get interviewed, because I read some and I listened to some in preparation for this, but I'm suspecting you're more on the interviewer end. Is that correct?
I'd say that's definitely where I'm more comfortable. I'm happy to answer questions, but I feel like I'm better at asking the questions. So we'll see how this goes today.
Well, that sounds good. And so let's just dig into that just a little bit more. You're comfortable asking or interviewing more so than answering questions. How do you find it different on both sides of the interview process here?
Yeah, I think that when you're the one asking the questions, to me, it's a lot less pressure. And I think that probably is based on personality. But for me, I feel like when you're the one asking the question, you do the preparation on the front end, and you can pretty much trust if you've done your research and you come into the interview well prepared. I feel like you can have confidence that it's going to go well, at least, that you'll sound like you know what you're doing. I feel like as the interviewer, you're often kind of following the lead, or the interviewee, you're following the lead of the interviewer. And so you have a lot more control, and maybe that's a sign that I'm some kind of control freak. But I like having control over, where the interview is going, and kind of trying to find the right angle to pursue. And I think when you're the interviewee, you're a lot more at the mercy of the person conducting the interview. And I think in a way that's kind of exciting and fun to me, because you never know exactly where it's going to go, and you have to think on your feet. And that's true when you're interviewing someone as well. I think, you never know what somebody's going to say. And so you can prepare all you want, but if they say something that may be unexpected, you have to think on your feet of how to respond to that question or that answer. So I don't know. I guess there are some similarities and some differences.
The way you describe that, I think, is spot on, at least spot on for how I feel as well. But it's interesting. I find as I interview people, as we mentioned in our podcast, everyone has something to give. And when you really dig down and give that individual an opportunity to share what those things are, then they just start to come out naturally because of the passion that you have about those things, and those things being your talents and your skills. And we'll dig more into that as we get a little further into the podcast. But I appreciate you sharing that. And I've shared with people before too, on the end of being the interviewer. I feel that every time I conduct an interview, I'm getting a personal coaching session from someone. And I'm able to learn from every individual that I interact with, as long as I'm listening. And I've noticed as I read through one interview that you'd went through, you had shared that when you're doing interviews, it is really good to be in the moment and to be present. And I think that's a good piece of advice for us in life in general. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. You mentioned, and I love the slogan of your podcast that you read at the beginning about, everybody has something to give and something to contribute. And I think it's really frequent that in this role, I can feel a little bit, and I feel like I'm a confident person, but sometimes I'm like, how on earth did I end up being the one that's sitting here having this conversation with this person who, under other circumstances, I should not be able to have this kind of opportunity. And so I think it's easy to kind of feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. But one thing that's really helped me to kind of combat that and and instead come into it as like, I am having this opportunity to represent a lot of people that are normal people and would love to have the chance to sit down with this person. So whether it's a church leader or whether it's someone like a professional athlete, like whatever it is, I'll come into it and think I'm representing a bigger whole of just ordinary people that would love to have the chance that I'm having. And because I'm normal, it makes it different. I don't think that I'm anything special. And because of that, it helps me craft questions, I think, because I feel like it's not just about me, and I can have the chance to ask questions in a way, like you said, you feel like you're getting a personal coaching session. I think I recognize a lot of the time I'll think, people would pay big money to have this business executive sit down with them and talk for an hour. And am I taking full advantage of that opportunity? And for me, the best way that you do that is by recognizing why you're being given the opportunity and what you're representing. And so for me, like I said, I think I just view it as, yes, I may be totally normal Joe Schmo, but I think that works because there are a lot of us that feel very normal and ordinary. And so that way I'm representing more than just myself.
You beautifully described that. And I definitely put myself in that normal category. And I feel like I'm a simple guy. And in fact, a lot of times I will introduce myself as I'm the guy next door. I'm your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And we're all in life, just trying to live life together. And having these opportunities to hear insight from others is always helpful. And one thing we try to do on this podcast is have a mix of people that we interview. We interview those that there might be several people that recognize who they are, and other times we interview people that nobody's ever even heard of them. And you know what? That's just fine, because we're all in this together. And so I loved that you shared that and said that. And I'm gonna throw something at you here, Morgan. I haven't done this before, but I felt impressed to do it today. So in part of my research in preparation for today's interview, I reached out to a highly esteemed panel of people, and they're called my family.
Okay.
All right. And many family members. And I threw it out there because several of them listen to your podcast, All In, and love the interviews and how you conduct those interviews. And so I asked, if you were to describe in one word Morgan Pearson, what would that word be? And so I had 3 words that rose to the top. So I'm going to share them with you. You ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay, here's the 3. Inquisitive, genuine, and Christ-like.
Wow. That means a lot to me. Tell your family thank you, Jack.
I will do that. And it's interesting, Morgan, just as I share those words, I'm having one of those moments I call inspirational moments, and it's where you get chills. And I met you today on this interview, but I've learned a lot about you and studying for you. But I guess that moment I'm having is that these things are true. And I'd like to dig into it a little bit, Morgan. Inquisitive. How would you say that fits with Morgan?
I think I genuinely love learning about other people. And I think that this, started when I was young. I think I've always liked asking questions. I maybe ask a little bit too many questions sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think that I notice sometimes, Jack, just in regular conversation with people, that I think I ask more questions than maybe the average person. And I think it's just because kind of the same thing of what we were just talking about with podcasting, but I think this is true of any interaction with anybody, is, you can sit there and shoot the breeze with somebody and walk away feeling like, I'm glad I got to spend time with that person, but I didn't walk away with anything that I'm going to hang on to forever. Or you can walk away, if you've asked questions and sought to learn from that person, even if it's just like, sitting around chatting with people. If you take advantage of those opportunities to converse with different types of people, there are things that you can take away from any conversation that can make you a better person. And so I think just in any setting, recognizing we kind of have a choice. Do you want to just engage at a surface level? Or a few years ago, it's probably been 6 years ago now, I wrote a story for the Deseret News about a man who actually had passed away. His name's Greg Madsen. And he had this saying that he would say, and it was based off of, he was a big San Francisco 49ers fan. And it was when Steve Young and Jerry Rice were playing, and he would always say that Jerry Rice went deep fast. And so he would say that that's what he tried to do in life with people, is go deep fast. He's like, we don't have time for the small talk. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Have a good day. Like, go deep fast with people. And I think that's what I feel like I try to do is, and the podcast, to be fair, when people come into a podcast interview, they're asking you to go deep fast.
Right.
They come in with an understanding, like, we are about to do this. And I think that's not as true in our day-to-day interactions, but you still can. You can find a way to learn from people no matter what the setting.
I agree with that. And some people are naturally inquisitive and others that aren't. And if there's anybody listening today that doesn't feel like they are, you can become that way. And listen, soak in what Morgan was just sharing, because it enriches your life. In the School of Life Foundation, one of the straight A's of life we teach is associate. And the homework in life for that is get to know someone new every week. And if you'll do that, at the end of the year, you'll have 52 new friends. And if you go deep fast with them, they will with you, and you build some lasting relationships. And it's an important thing in the world as it is now. And I'll slide to that second word that came from my esteemed panel. And I think part of it just came out in your answer, genuine. What does that mean in the life of Morgan Pearson?
Well, I think it's interesting, Jack, because I think the world has an interesting focus right now on authenticity.
Yes.
And I don't think authenticity and being genuine are necessarily the same thing, at least by the world's definition. I think authenticity says, be true to who you are. Don't worry about anything else or anyone else. And I think, at least by that definition, the difference between being genuine and being authentic is being genuine means being a person of integrity, hopefully, being consistent, and making sure that no matter which aspect of your life you're participating in, that you are being the same person. And I just read something yesterday where Rick Warren, who's a evangelical pastor, talked about how integrity means wholeness. And so he said, if you segment your life into professional and personal and spiritual, and those aspects of your life never mesh, then you may be lacking integrity. And I think the same thing is true of being genuine. If I were to have a job that included, if I were to have the job that I have, and I didn't bring in aspects of my personal life and the things that I'm experiencing or the things that I'm learning in my personal study as far as the gospel goes, or professionally, I'm not bringing those things into what I'm studying for my personal, scripture study, then those things never mesh and I'm not being genuine. And so I think, to me, being genuine means, for example, in my family life over the past few years, I have a number of siblings who have struggled with their faith. And a lot of times, it would be easier for me not to talk about that on the podcast. But the reality of the situation is those experiences have shaped the questions that I ask, the way that I approach interviews. They're actually something that I'm super grateful for, because I think it's changed me and my perspective. And so trying to bring all aspects, and that means the areas in which I fall short, to the conversations that I'm having, and recognizing that if I'm going to be genuine, I want to be consistent, and I don't want to be, just I'm going to be true to me, because I think that the reality is we want to be disciples of Christ. We want to be, we want to carry ourselves in a way that glorifies God rather than glorifying ourselves. And for me, that's a big part of being genuine.
As we interview people, we both get the chance to do that. And those that are genuine in the way you just outlined that, those messages I find touch people deeper. And I'm not saying that anyone that's been on the show isn't genuine. I think they all are. But when you're around people, Morgan, that are genuine, you get to know that and sense that pretty quickly, because it's a powerful trait. And I believe it's something that we need more and more in the world. and it's something that we can work on, just the way you described it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
As I go into the third word here, I recognize, or the third item that described you, this is probably it's a tender and a personal subject to talk about, but why would come to the top of the list is a description of Morgan Pearson, the term Christ-like.
Jack, I do not know. I like, that's the one that, if there's any one that is what I feel like I'm striving for, it would be that one, but I feel like I fall short a lot. I would say it's the same after both of those other words. You've highlighted the fact that those are things we can work on. And I completely agree. I was going to say, asking questions, I think it's interesting. When I first started, attempting a podcast, it was because somebody said to me, Morgan, you've been doing these interviews for 4.5 years. It's just that no one's heard them. And I didn't have confidence in myself and in my ability to do this, but I knew that person was right. I had practiced. I had put in work to understand what makes a good question, what's going to draw the most out of people. And I think there's an assumption a lot of times that, talking and having a conversation is an easy thing to do. And really asking questions, I think, takes work. It's something that I'm still working at to become better. And so there's that. And then, like you said, being genuine is something that we can work at. We can try to, cultivate that consistency. We can cultivate, maybe I'm not bringing my personal self into these settings. How can I more fully do that? And so you work at those things. And I think for me, seeking to be like Jesus Christ is a lifelong endeavor. It's something where you take a look at yourself on a regular basis, and it's like, okay. And I think there was a quote by Richard G. Scott that I had on a Post-it note when I was a missionary, and it talked about how we will become better at different times in our lives at different things. And then we'll have to, it's not that we're constantly improving all the time at all the things, and that the Lord will help us recognize the thing that we need to focus on at a given time. And I think that that's absolutely true. And so for me, I try to cut myself a lot of slack, recognizing that, if I'm working on patience, maybe I'll see that patience get better. And then a couple years from now, I'll be like, oh, I need to work on patience again. And so it's never something that you stop working on. And I, Jack, will be completely honest with you and tell you that I have a very, very, very long way to go. But the fact that your family said that, I don't know that I have received a higher compliment, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you. And Morgan, the humility in your answer to that question describes to me why you're seen that way. And it is interesting. Our lives are an evolution and a process. And the way you answered those questions today, 5 years from now, you'd probably answer them differently. 10 years from now, differently, and so on and so forth. And I think that's part of the beauty of life, is that opportunity for us to grow and to progress. And we have opportunity every day to become better. And that brings good things to our lives. And with that, I'm going to springboard into the invitation that we have on this podcast, and that is find what brings you joy and match it to the needs of the world. I'm going to describe that a little bit further. I believe that the things that bring us joy in life, the most joy, are often tied to our talents and to our skills. And we find and discover those through inspirational moments that happen in our lives. And as we develop them further, that starts to also help us develop more our purpose in life, our mission in life. And that even evolves and changes. And then ultimately we're delivering those things, which becomes our gift to the world. And it's a process that we go through in life. And I don't think we even recognize it at times. And that's part of why I like to try to get people to maybe slow down a minute and recognize it, because the more we do, I think the more we can tune in what we have to give. And ultimately, the more we give, the more we get, I guess. And I don't mean that in the worldly sense of things, but as we improve the lives of people around us, then our life is lifted up and improved as well. So with that invitation, I'm going to ask you first, what do you feel your talents and skills are? What are those things that brings joy into Morgan Pearson's life?
Well, there's a funny thing about me, Jack, which is from the time I was little tiny, I can remember going in the bathroom and pretending like I was interviewing people.
Wow.
And I would pretend like I was like a celebrity being interviewed, but I would be both the interviewer and the interviewee.
Yes.
And I think I always thought, when I was little, I wanted to be a gymnast. So I think I would pretend like I was a famous gymnast, or later I wanted to be like Kelly Clarkson. And so I'd pretend that I was, a famous singer. And so I think honestly, asking questions and answering questions is something that I've always loved to do. I like to talk, but I also really like to listen. And I think that those are our talents. I also think, God has given me an ability to write, and that's something that I have loved doing. I think it's the way that he helps me feel like I'm creating, which I think is an innate desire that we all have. We're all born with a desire to create, and I'm not an artist. And so being able to create in that way, starting with a blank Microsoft Word document is kind of like a canvas, and being able to tell a story in that way. And then I would say another thing that I feel really blessed by, and I recognize that this is not something that you just, rest on your laurels and feel good about. But I feel like God has given me the ability to have the gift of believing. And I feel like I was born with a believing heart and with a love for the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think from the time I was a little girl, I remember just loving going to church. And I didn't have a lot of friends at church. I grew up in a part of the country where there were not a lot of Latter-day Saints. And so, being a minority and still like loving that and wanting to go and looking forward to it, I think the only explanation to me is just that I believed it. And I have tried to continue to develop that faith and that belief, recognizing that it's not something that is stagnant in our lives. I think you always have to, if you believe something, you want to continue to deepen that belief, or you can lose it. So I think the gift of belief also is something that I consider to be something that God has blessed me with, and not something to take lightly, but to use to try to help other people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I just want to share one thing. There may be people listening to the show today that's not aware of your podcast, and it's they've heard me reference. It's called All In. But you're asking people, how and why they're all in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so that helps define your answer there a little bit more. And I hope people, if they haven't listened, will listen to it, because it is wonderful, wonderful podcast. But it's interesting as you described your talents and skills, and they were embedded with you at an early age, which I believe is true for all of us, Morgan. And as we go through life, through God divinely, we can be led if we will listen. And that's one thing I talk about is, our soul speaks to us. We need to not only listen, but then have the courage to act upon what we're hearing. And you mentioned earlier in our discussion about being approached to do the podcast, and I believe it was your opinion editor at the time, Hal Boyd. Is that correct? And I'm just going to read here from an interview I read from you. Your response was, "What? No, not me." And and that's a natural response, but yet you had the courage to move forward with that, because inside yourself you knew interviewing was one of your gifts and talents. And it's not like they just naturally happen to us. As we do these gifts and talents, because they're things we enjoy to do, we get better and better and better at them. Just like, a professional athlete gets better and better as they're practicing over time. But that's one thing I want to point out to people, and I'm going to ask for your input on it. When we have these inspirational moments that inspires us to move forward on these talents and skills, our toughest opponent, which is ourselves, quite often will say, "No, you're not good enough. You're not this enough. You're not that enough." How do we work through that? How do you work through that, Morgan?
Well, I think, going back to, and it's interesting because that podcast that we started working on with Hal, it wasn't all in and it never saw the light of day.
Yeah.
And, failure is a whole nother topic where it's like that can make you feel crummy about yourself and like you're not capable of achieving the thing that you're working at.
Right.
But I think, in that case, it was interesting because it was like he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I think when somebody believes in you and believes that you're capable of doing something, it's almost like you want to prove that person right. And I think that's why it's so important for us to express the belief that we have in others and to help them see the things that we see in them, because then they want to prove us right, and it brings more good into the world. If we focus on the negative that we see in other people and are always, highlighting their weaknesses and criticizing, I just don't think that invites more good into the world. But if we can help people see what God sees in them, it makes them want to work harder and to try to prove you right. So I think that that's an important thing in that situation. Like I said earlier, I think for me, there are a lot of times where like I'll sit there in the room and I'll think, what on earth is a little girl from North Carolina doing sitting in this room, But I think that the thing that has given me confidence is looking back and seeing how God's directed my life. Just today, I got a text from my dad. And my dad is the sweetest. But just out of the blue, he said, "Do you ever stop and think about how the Lord has blessed you and answered your prayers? I'm sure you do. I'm so happy for you." And I think that's true. If we take a moment to look back and reflect on the fact that God has led us to moments, like you said, moments of inspiration that allow us to embrace and use our talents and our abilities. And he doesn't want us to shy away from the opportunities that he's given us. He wants us to look back, recognize that his hand has been in it all along, and then take confidence in that. And so for me, I think, I look at the things that God has allowed me to do on paper, and it's like one thing after another where I'm like, I had no business doing that thing. But apparently like God sees something in me that I don't see in myself. And so I'll take him to the bank on that. And I think that we can all do that.
Yes, God sees our full potential, but I want to back up too, where you mentioned we see potential in others. And please, 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 when you see that in someone, let them know that, because that might actually even be the inspirational moment in that person's life where the light bulb goes off and the recognition comes. Yeah, I can do this. I can do that because somebody believes in me. So we can be that catalyst for people all the time. And then as we move forward and we're using those skills and those talents, it might bless the life of one person, or it might bless the life of millions of people. The thing of it is, it doesn't matter whether it's one or a million. It only takes one. And that one person you influence might be a person that changes the world with something phenomenal. Or maybe they'll change the world in one other person's life. But as we go along and that's happening one person at a time, it just makes things beautiful. And so you've got these skills and talents you're recognizing, you're developing, and you're discovering your purpose in life. And that's going to be differently answered years from now. But right now, today, in your life, how would you describe what your purpose is?
That's a really good question. I think that for now, I feel like a big part of my purpose has just been to try to help people recognize that they're not alone in trying to live a life of faith. And I think that, you were talking about meeting the need that the world has. And I feel like one of the biggest needs that our world has right now is belief and faith. And so I think it's becoming increasingly unpopular to live a life of faith, especially among a younger generation. And so if I can help that generation, my generation of people and younger, recognize that a life of faith is worth living and rewarding and beautiful, and that if they feel a little bit different than other people, well, here's this person that also is a little bit different and may not feel like they fit the mold, but they're living a life of faith and seeing the blessings of it. And so not just in through my own example, but by introducing them to other people that can help them recognize the value of that. I think that's been a huge purpose in my life. And then I would say just striving to become more like Christ and hopefully helping others find their way to him in whatever way possible.
Morgan, if everyone takes on that attitude that you just shared, this world definitely will be a better place. And yes, there is a need in the world for more believing and more faith, and that's in our divinity, right? We are sons and daughters of God. And so thank you for doing your part to help that particular need in the world. And I suspect, in fact, I know your thoughts of your purpose will continue to develop further as you continue on this path in the journey of life. And one of my favorite quotes, and I hope listeners don't get tired of me sharing it, but I think it's important, comes from Mark Twain. And he said that the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day that you figure out why. And I believe that why is our purpose. And that's why I would like individuals to stop, slow down a little bit, recognize what your gifts and your talents are. And these things are bringing you joy, but they can bring others joy. And so develop that into what your purpose is and then deliver it, because that is your gift to the world. And if, my ultimate goal is if everyone is doing that, how wonderful the world will be. I just absolutely love this discussion with you today, Morgan. Again, so appreciative of your time. I could go on for hours talking with you, but I know we do need to come to an end. And so in doing so, the way I like to close off each episode is asking the person I'm interviewing the golden nugget question, and that is, if there's only one thing that people listening today takes from this interview, whether it's something we've talked about or something we haven't even talked about, Morgan, what would you be the one thing you want people to learn from you?
I think it's actually something that I feel like I learned from you, Jack, in this conversation when you were talking about how by expressing our belief in other people and helping them see what we see or what God sees in them, we never know the effect of that. And that person could go on to influence one other person. They could go on to influence hundreds of other people because of what we've helped them see. And it reminded me, my husband's grandmother just passed away, and we were at her funeral this past weekend. And at the funeral, his aunt shared a quote, and I wish that I had the quote handy. But it talked about how a person, once they pass, it said they're still alive as long as the ripples of their influence that have trickled down continue to extend. And I think that that's true. I think, in our lives, we have the opportunity to play a role in, like you said, if you're trying to make a different friend every week, like how over a lifetime, what does that add up to? And if we have the opportunity to cross paths with that many different people, there's a quote by Richard Paul Evans that I love from one of his books, that it says something to the effect of, there are people waiting for my path to cross with theirs in order to complete their journey. I don't know who they are, but I know for certain that they are waiting. And so if we approach life in that way, recognizing that we will interact with countless people over the course of a lifetime, and in those little interactions, we have the opportunity to help them see in themselves what God sees in them, and to see their gifts and their abilities, then we can leave a lasting impact, because that ripple effect will just go on and on and on. And then we live long after we're gone. And so I think that that is the beauty of life and the beauty of relationships and interactions with other people. And if we could all do that, I think it would make a big difference in the world.
Morgan, that's a great piece of advice to end on. And that ripple effect that you talk about, I define that in our lives as our character. And that comes from the way you live your life. And so whether you're leaving this life here on earth, or you're leaving a room, or you're leaving a job, or you're wherever you're leaving, something stays behind, and that is your character. And you know what? I'm going to ask the listeners today, what will your character be? And what will your ripple effect be as you move on from different things? So please, please, please take that golden nugget from Morgan, that wonderful piece of advice. And before I close out the show here, is there anything else you have on your mind there, Morgan?
No, Jack, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much from you. So thank you so much for this opportunity and for all the good that you're doing.
Thank you, Morgan. And for those listening to the show today, remember that your heart feels for you, your mind reasons for you, but your soul speaks to you. Are you listening? Did you listen today? If so, what did you hear? What did you learn? will you now have the courage to act upon what you felt? Thank you for tuning in. Please follow us on your podcast app so that each new episode is always downloaded, ready for you to listen in, and then share the link with others. We would love to have you leave a review, and you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to send us a message or desire to be on the show, you can send an email to whatyagiven@gmail.com. A special thanks goes to our producers, Ben and Kayla Martin. Now, it is time to move upward and onward and ask yourself, what you given?